Aaron, thank you so much, and thank you very much for inviting me here this evening, and of course thank you very much for having faith in me and publishing the Incontinent of Royy. It's been a labour of love over the last few years. I swerved away from poetry. I started writing these stories on my balcony in Rome. I was popping out one a night and not thinking they go anywhere, and yet. So I'm just immensely grateful that you've taken this to be part of the Broken Sleep Books gang. I'm really delighted with that. And I've got a few. I think 4 stories to read you tonight. They're all quite short. All the stories in the collection are fairly short. The longest is like about 2,000 words. The shortest is about 150 words. There are 54 of them, and they tell the story of I created a continent. I had no interest in creating a continent, but then I created a continent, and full of people who cannot control themselves. And so I have a continent full of incontinental people. That's where the play comes from in the title. And what I'd like to do is I'll kick off with the first of the prologue, which is then the creation myth of the people of Royy, and then I'll read you 3 stories about the folk in Royy. So this is the prologue. It's called Bang. There was a bang, but nobody heard it. The universe shattered, but there was nobody there to see. It was tremendous. There were holes everywhere. The sky wasn't yet. There was a lot of gas. It's all so impossible to imagine, let alone find the right words for. Planet Earth was carved from chaos. It's been in the blood for 4 billion years. Continents split from the main until there was no main. Rivers sprang, mountains erupted through rock, ecosystems were born because weather. Terra firma, cluelessness. What's happening? Chaos, that's what. The dinosaurs had chaos down. I've seen the movies. Chaos was in the bones of the first fish to walk out of the sea. It was all very nonchalant, like, it's just me, so I'll boss the joint. But there was no joint to boss until others came in their own good time, flapped around until they had legs, stood up, pointed at something, gave it a 1-syllable name. Soon after came a lot of anguish over who had the safest cave, which led to unspeakable violence. Vegetables began to grow. They changed the landscape. There were broccoli spears. Lots of men and women were fucking because it felt good. Clothing became necessary, then more clothing as their children grew. Soon after came a lot of anguish over who had the sickest gear, which led to unspeakable violence and fashion. Sun worship became necessary because life was tough and questions needed answering. Leaders rose to conduct the services. It was all very holier than thou. Groups formed when the priests alternately picked their favorites until it was just the dying guy at the end. They all waited until the dying guy was dead and missed him. They put a huge rock on top of his body and went their way. Picture these cave people, little heads with loping jaws, wayward gaits, tense fists. Intimacy was brutal. Loincloths with crude decorations, but at least something. It was a start. Faces up to the sky, looking for the sun in the rain, getting soaked. Early forms of pneumonia, more missing, more huge rocks. Bare-skinned in the glare of day, men and women picked things from the ground, had a quick bite, see if it was heading cavewards. Some of it was rock hard and fit neatly in the palm. Exchanges of weapons, practice on each other, impulse control issues, casual slaughter, missing, rocks, the spoils of chaos, jealousy, covetousness, the first side eye. Lots of loiterers around cave entrances, the general lack of trust. We had a vague idea of who we were. We addressed one another crudely, fair enough. It was all a very long time ago. And anyway, consciousness doesn't mean conscience. So chaos was always close to the surface, likely to break out over the smallest of misunderstandings, like there wasn't enough wood for the fire, or It was your turn to kill the bears, or what are you looking at? Rage won every day, but there was fucking every night. The desire to spread the seed a very long way down time. There were bangs and everybody heard them. Okay, that's where this lot come from, and I'm just gonna carry straight on. I've got a story about a poet which I thought I could only share here this evening. I thought I had no choice but to go with this one. So some of you may recognize some aspects of what you're about to hear. This is called Tele. I'm walking back from the market with a bag of beetroot. They are the color of congealed blood and hard as truncheons. I don't want things to kick off and be without them. It's the rough part of town. Skarsnagat, the loiterer, gave me her sideways look, which stretched from Hild the florist's all the way down to Excellent the couturier's. Something was brewing in the alehouse, and I wanted to be in charge of the gas canisters. What's Coppola doing in a sleeping bag snug against the station entrance? I'm down on my luck, he replied. 2 trains bombed through. The masonry shook. A pigeon, an Antwerp smurl, I believe, flew out of the exposed rafters, followed by her children. Invention abuts nature, I said to Coppola, feeling in my pocket for a coin. The last time I saw you, you'd received a small grant from the state towards your artistic enterprises. Now this, which was intended to be a question, but came out wrong. Let me tell you, Tele, I'll tell you, said Coppola, his face poking through the bag's open end. He was the shadow of a babushka doll. I think he was fucking with my name. I staked all on poetry, he said, when I'd have been better off writing crime fiction, particularly here in Royy, where there's no end to the exciting plot-driven lives of millions. He looked mournful, like a priest on Good Friday. Oh, Tele, he said, and hauled himself up against the wall as another pair of trains rocketed through, and some dust landed inside Coppola's center parting. By every measure, he said, I am worthless. We all have rough times, Coppola, I said, looking forward to a hot dinner and a comfortable bed. This too will pass, I said, wafting my arms around the vicinity. I reached for the most direct way to explain what it is to be, said Coppola, and I sold 7 copies, and 3 of those wanted their money back. They are related to me. I cannot begin to tell you, he said, which I found odd because I thought he'd finished telling me. They said of my debut collection, he said, painstakingly put together in the time the small grant bought, that I'd tried to sneak into first class with my coach class cognizance, that my poetry sat on the line like a shit biscuit, and from Wet Heart at the Daily Courier, that if this was poetry, she was a cow, which was most unkind given what she told me about her birthday last month. I knew I had the right words, but they came out in the wrong order, Coppola said. The publisher cut ties. I had ruined his summer, he said. My wife threw me out. She was embarrassed by my futility, she said, and handed me the sleeping bag. It's noisy here and people couldn't care less. It's perfect. I was surprised to see the Antwerp smurl. I thought she died. And if you could do it again, Coppola, I said, how would your route differ? He looked at me as if I was talking nonsense, as if my figure of speech had misfired. Coppola knows all about misfiring. He can't write for shit, I thought to myself, eyeballing him. If I get you right, said Coppola, removing an arm from inside the bag, you're asking me what exactly? Oh, I said, do you have a novel in you? Yes, said Coppola, and now I think that's exactly where it should stay. I flipped him 2 bits and he caught them cleanly. There's no money in writing, Tele, he said, nodding at his bounty. There's only other people's money in your writing, I said, before I could stop myself, and you fucked that up, poet, I said. This is an annoying habit I have developed. My mother was first to mention it. I told her to get lost. Coppola looked shocked. I should have gone for murder mystery, he said, instead of trying to encapsulate the entire human condition. I thought he said conditioner and glanced at his sorry hair. Is there nobody you can turn to in this time of need, I said, waving to Dubsy, who dashed into the ticket office. He owes me. My words struck all the wrong chords, said Coppola, too indulgently for my liking. I am a one-star writer for Evermore, he said, and burst into tears, which I found embarrassing. Commuters might think it was my doing. I've read the reviews. His poetry is bilge. I didn't know where to look, so I looked at my feet. There was an iridescent caterpillar mounting my new trainer. It felt like a metaphor. Long live poets. Okay, that's Tele. I'm going to move on to Stillanak. And if there are any philosophers in the house, you might recognize this to be quite similar to the death of Roland Barthes, the French philosopher. This is called Stillanak. Although he once possessed many fine qualities, Stillanak will forever be known as the driver of the laundry van that knocked down Roy's most famous philosopher, Denkstedt, a global expert on signs taken for wonders, right outside the royal palace, which they were both leaving, the philosopher with a gold medal, Stillanak with soiled shirts. The philosopher's head was in the clouds after the modest lunch at his request, just he and the popular literature-loving president bonding over soup and baguettes. Perhaps Denkstedt was contemplating his medal as a simulacrum or a sign of conscious reactionary conformity when Stillanak turned the corner carefully, obeying all lights and wallop. Philosopher bonnet, bonnet philosopher, break, slide, stone dead. Dead as many of the greats who had carried him on their shoulders, ancient and modern. Denkstedt was a national treasure and no one knew why. But people are ready to blame and our gods judge harshly. Folk can be so nasty, so unnecessary. Immediately his identity broke and TV crews pitched up at his bungalow, which was disturbing for his wife and children. No one saw Stillanak the way he was anymore. No longer was he Stillanak the laundry guy to his friends at the bar, but a symbol of teleological capitalist global warming denial. To his parents, a heartbreaking indictment of the collapse of standards in contemporary Western society, or simply a loose cannon behind the wheel. Stillanak faced no judicial punishment for the philosopher's death. He was blameless, his eyesight tested again, and fine. The philosopher's family should indeed be grateful Stillanak was at the wheel, given his lengthy experience of transporting dirty and or clean laundry, or there'd be nothing left to stick in a coffin, funded by the state, shaped like a question mark, and of the highest order. Sadly, Denkstedt's death was only the beginning. All life went awry. It was the merest consolation, but Stillanak, who mostly stayed home, went on to read the complete works of his roadkill, eventually going out of his mind, wondering what the philosopher of signs taken for wonders would have written about his own means of death. There's probably a multi-chapter publication Denkstedt's missed out on there, repeated poor Stillanak over and over to himself, banging his head against a cushioned wall. And there are others out there like him and Roy, all mad. Great, and finally, a really short little one. You may have noticed the names. I've had so much fun with the names of their global names. They're names that are spliced together, pulled apart, stuck back together again from all over the place. Frankly, a lot of the characters in Roy only exist in terms of their name. They don't do anything else. I think there are about 400 names, something like that, in here in total. That's just a little conceit that I've worked with here. I've loved it. The names are so much fun. I've had a real laugh with the names. The final little story I'm going to read to you tonight is called Matunga. Next to me at the traffic lights in a convertible was a smiling Obadele. I wound my window down by hand. What are you so happy about, smiling Obadele? I asked. Everything, Matunga, everything, exclaimed Obadele finally. I don't have any friends. At this, he lit a long cigar. I've had successful fallings out with you, you bitch, and with Calms, Smithson, and Jere, Montserrat, and Iddy. Bitches or sons or daughters of bitches, one and all. I feel so unburdened, he said. What is it about you and people, I asked him. Just then the lights changed, and the convertible behind Obadele beeped its horn. Obadele put on his handbrake, car into neutral, undid his seatbelt, opened the door. By this time, many horns were blowing, walked to the car behind, clenched his fist, and banged the driver right on top of the head. He slumped immediately down onto his steering wheel, stone dead. And that's really all that happened at those traffic lights. Oh, and all the horns stopped at once. That's me. Thank you so much, Aaron. That's been brilliant.